Welcome to the Republican Professor. I am your host today, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. How's it going, guys? It's the morning today. Okay. So I'm a little bit silly. I'm having my cup of coffee. I'm waking up. Um, we're in one of them rich neighborhoods where there's a lot of construction. What is it about these rich houses? They can't just be enjoyed. They always have to be adding to them or redoing them somehow. Yeah, rich people. So we're in a rich neighborhood right now. Daggum rich people. Well, this is the Daggum Republican Professor. I'm your Daggum host, Dr. Lucas J. Daggum Mather. We're continuing with Kesler's piece in the Claremont-Review-of-Books, Fall 2024. I love this piece. We stopped at Kamala's red shift, which is I love the take on this. The piece is called America's Red Shift. I'm sharing my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. It's written by my former professor, Dr. Charles R. Kesler, Ph.D. from Harvard. He's got a fancy sinecure there at Claremont McKenna College, where I had him as a professor at Claremont Colleges, and had him for 4 classes. Let's pick up because I already gave him an introduction. I've given him an introduction a few different times. We're just going to get right into Kamala's red shift, the Democrats' effort to build a broader coalition of resistance to Donald Trump than they had assembled in 2016 and 2020 failed spectacularly. And thank God it did. Thank God. Thank God. Oh, can you imagine? They lost ground almost everywhere. The countries around Atlanta were an exception. The counties, sorry, the countries, wow. Kamala Harris faced a dilemma. She could run as the designated successor to Joe Biden's deeply unpopular administration, but she could not afford to repudiate it either. The term Biden-Harris administration dropped from sight except as a Republican talking point. She declared, I'm reading the paper copy, which, by the way, get the paper copy, go to ClaremontReviewofBooks.com and sign up. It's a nominal fee. You get this wonderful hardcover sucker, and it's got great artwork. Even the ads are attractive. Go to ClaremontReviewofBooks.com and join. We appreciate Claremont Review of Books for making this material available. We're going to make a fair use and a transformative reading of this, make some comments about it as we go along. But let's support Claremont Review of Books. They're doing good work. I'm serious, guys. I'm serious. You're in the right place here. You're in the right place. Republican talking point. She declared her independence. She declared her independence. See, Kessler's got these. He's actually quite funny. He's very subtle. She declared her independence from him quietly and indirectly by stressing different issues and, above all, a different mood to her campaign. Yeah, remember the joy? In doing so, she also, in effect, declared independence from her own 2020 rhetoric and campaign pitches when she was running as Biden's fresh-faced vice presidential pick. The change went largely unnoticed because who remembers what a vice presidential nominee says anyway? Regardless, the change marked Harris's own kind of red shift, months in advance of the election, when in 2020 she accepted her party's vice presidential nomination in these COVID days. Oh, I hate that word, COVID. Ugh. You guys can always tell if someone says during COVID, you can tell they were a masked person. Can't you? Is it just me? During COVID. I don't say that. I say during the lockdowns. During the ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, utterly ridiculous lockdowns. Tyrannical lockdowns. That's what I say. But other people say during COVID. You could say during the bioweapon days. Anyway, Harris spoke from the empty Chevy Chase Center, at the Chase Center, in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm not sure if it was Chevy Chase Center, actually. The Chase Center, sorry. Probably Chase Manhattan, but Harris spoke from the empty Chase Center in Wilmington, Delaware. She noted the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to women. That's back when they knew how to define women. As I tell my students, if to become a man, all you have to do is say you're a man, there was never any point to the 19th Amendment. You could vote anytime you want. Just say, I'm a man now, and then you vote, and then you go back to being a woman after you vote. You should see the looks on their faces. The looks on their faces. She noted the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave the vote to women. She hailed, in particular, the black women. I think she means as distinct from black men in a way that would be commonsensically obvious. And also, to some extent, maybe entirely in line with common sense, meaning it's not up to your will what you are as far as your gender. But I digress. She hailed in particular the black women who helped secure that victory, and yet, long after its ratification, had still been prohibited from voting in the Jim Crow South and elsewhere. I just had a peanut butter toast with raspberry, and, that came out in a little bit of a burp there. Sorry. Having coffee. No, I'm not hungover. No. I don't know why. I'm enjoying this morning. The birds are quiet today, though. They are usually so loud. And so I thought, well, maybe I can actually get a recording done. And then these guys started hammering over here. Hope you can't hear that. Can you hear it? I'm asking my producer. Can you hear that? Okay. We're good. We're going to keep going. Kamala's red shift. It's funny about this section right here. They're the party of civil rights, right? That's what they say. And they can't even define what a woman is. Now, if you can't define what a woman is, how do you celebrate women's rights? It's just so incoherent. This is what decades of grade inflation has given you. Democrat indoctrination, grade inflation. She hailed, in particular, the black women who helped secure that victory. And yet, long after its ratification, had still been prohibited from voting in the Jim Crow South and elsewhere. The reason I'm laughing about that is it's just I can't get out of my head. They can't define what a woman is. And secondly, there's another reason. And that's what I ask my students. If only men could vote. Let's just have that as a premise. If only men could vote, then who was it that secured that victory for allowing women to vote? Yeah, you're right. Men. Men made that decision. Yet men are never given the credit for it. Moving on. MovingOn.org, who, by the way, supported the incumbent president whenever it's a Democrat, which makes no sense if it's Move On. But I digress. She connected these injustices to the COVID pandemic and its differential effects. While, quote, this virus touches us all, unquote, she said, quote, let's be honest. It's not an equal opportunity offender. Black, Latino, and indigenous people are suffering and dying disproportionately, unquote. I think she means American Indians. I think that's what she means. Because I'm indigenous to the United States. I'm native here. I'm not native anywhere else. Where would I be native to? I'm indigenous to here. But I'm not American Indian. This is not a coincidence, she argued. Here's a block quote. It is the effect of structural racism, of inequities in education and technology, healthcare and housing, job security and transportation. The injustice in reproductive and maternal health care. Maternal? What? Did you sneak that word in there? You mean that a pregnant woman is a mother? Is that what you're saying? A mother. Well, let's look up that word. Wonder what mother means. I think it's a woman with children. I think that's what that means. Interesting. You got to be able to define women. You got to be able to define children and their relationship to each other. That's the very definition of maternal. Right? Am I right? Or am I right? Or am I right? Or am I right? She calls killing your children healthcare. Gotcha. Interesting. Roe versus Wade, incidentally, in the text of the opinion of the court, calls the woman seeking an abortion the mother. A mother. Yeah, these kind of things, they sneak in there, don't they? And they undermine your position. In the excess use of force by police, wouldn't that be the government? So you're saying the government is too powerful? And in our broader criminal justice system, that's also the government. So you're saying the government is too powerful? Why all the criminal penalties then for gun control laws? What about that? What about that? That's the 2020 Democrat. Amazing. This is amazing, guys. Here's Kesler again. As the vice presidential candidate, in short, she was in full progressive mode, which is incoherent because they want to increase the power of the government and increase criminal penalties. But I digress. Echoing her running mate's frequent campaign speeches condemning systemic racism as the deepest cause of America's ills, she brought up George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, too. America was very far from being that beloved community of justice and kindness that our parents and grandparents fought for. But it was that same vision that made the American promise, for all its complexities and imperfections, a promise worth fighting for. Fast forward 4 years to Harris's speech in Chicago, accepting her party's presidential nomination. Gone was the emphasis on women and black women as the key to American history and identity. Fascinating. This is Kamala's Redshift and America's Redshift, Fall 2024, Claremont Review of Books. I'm on page 9. Charles R. Kesler is the author. Thank you, Charles, for writing this. Thank you, Claremont Review of Books, for publishing it and making it available. Go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com. Get your subscription. They're not a paid sponsor. I'm doing this because I believe in them, what they're doing. They're right in the middle of what's happening here. That's good. Good stuff that's happening. Gone was the emphasis on women and black women as the key to American history and identity. She presented herself as the proud daughter of two immigrants and as a proud citizen of the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And indeed, the greatest nation on earth. Harris pledged to fight for this country we love and to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American, unquote. In place of 2020's complexities and imperfections of the American promise and the enduring reality of structural racism throughout American history and society, Harris promised in 2024 to honor and to, quote, hold sacred America's fundamental principles, unquote, which apparently were not so bad after all. Although not strictly contradictory, the two speeches differed profoundly in tone and in her evaluation of America. She abandoned all the standard woke or progressive critiques of her racist, sexist, cruel country based on its endemic oppression of identity groups for a more centrist, middle-class, openly patriotic appeal. She shifted red, in effect. That's the unacknowledged source of her politics of joy, which dominated the initial months of her run for the presidency. That's very insightful, Charles. That's very insightful. Oh, remember her laugh? Oh, that's shifting red. Republicans laugh. Republicans have joy. That's a great point. Even when it came to abortion, the feminist cause she emphasized throughout her campaign, she talked about it less as a requirement of women's radical autonomy or equality and more as a violation by government, headed by men to be sure, of women's reproductive rights, quote unquote, as though she were lodging a libertarian complaint against big government's intrusion on private property. He's a very insightful observer of American politics, Kesler is. And I've mentioned this before. I'll leave you to look at the other episodes where I talk him up. Leave aside her use of the pregnant term reproductive freedom for what is more accurately non or anti-reproductive freedom. Another insightful point. Yeah, I mean, going back to the big government intrusion on private property. Wow, a sudden awakening. Where was that insight in the George Floyd stuff? Because when I saw the George Floyd thing, I saw a government official on a private citizen. That's what I saw. And what I saw is true. That's what I saw. Fascinating. Kamala's red shift served an obvious purpose. She wanted to win. She and her advisor sensed rightly that woke orthodoxy, or even Biden's shouted or whispered, he had only 2 volume settings, version of it, warning tediously that Trump imperiled our democracy, was not a winning strategy. It was this new moderate Kamala she displayed in her presidential debate with Trump, whom she made fun of as weird and unserious rather than demonic. Remember that? Remember where they were saying J.D. Vance is weird and unserious? They're projecting. They were projecting. When they said he was demonic, they were also projecting. This was also cool Kamala, brat Kamala, confident about America and excited to be ushering in its happy green future. Barf. My gosh. It sounded like a good strategy, but it didn't work. Charles, it worked a lot better than I think we all want to admit. She got over 200 electoral college votes. That's disgustingly scary. One reason it didn't was that though the public didn't recall or care what she had said in her 2020 acceptance speech, they did care once they were reminded by Trump and the news media about her eager endorsement in 2019-20 of her far-left progressive policies. Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders' expansive plan to one-up Obamacare, the right to government-paid sex change operations for prison inmates and even illegal immigrants in prison, a ban on fracking. She had once endorsed all of these trendy panaceas and more. Takes your breath away. In 2024, alas, they were trending no longer. What to say about them? There were too many to disguise or deny. Best then to say as little as possible. The usually double voluble Harris adopted an unnatural strategy of obtuseness. She would say merely that these old positions were no longer valid. She had changed her positions, but refused to say why. That's because she doesn't know why. She doesn't even know why she originally held them. Even the sternest questioning by the press, for instance, by the inestimable Bill Whitaker in 60 Minutes, failed to elicit more from her. He asked her directly, "You were against fracking. Now you're for it. You supported looser immigration policies. Now you're tightening up. People truly don't know what you believe or what you stand for." To which she replied, "I believe in building consensus. We are a diverse people. And what the American people do want is that we have leaders who can build consensus, where we can figure out compromise and understand it's not a bad thing as long as you don't compromise your values." Sounds like an undergraduate. And what I mean by undergrad is freshman. But Whitaker was asking, in effect, what are your values? It was as though the only thing she remembered from her days as a prosecuting attorney was that defendants have a right to remain silent, that anything you say can and will be used against you. So she said almost nothing. As a campaign strategy, this approach soon reached the point of diminishing returns. And in her final month or so before the election, Harris found an issue to talk about that had very little to do with compromise or joy. She reverted more or less desperately to Biden's favorite theme: Trump is Hitler. This next section in this piece is called Sitting Down with Hitler. And yet, several days after the election, there were Joe Biden and Donald Trump sitting together in the Oval Office, smiling and shaking hands. Biden addressed Trump as former president and president-elect and Donald, and looked forward to a smooth transition and offered to do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated. Afterward, the two men, joined by staffers, chatted for 2 hours. Would you shake hands with Herr Hitler? Would you promise to do everything possible to accommodate him in his new job? What was Biden thinking? Always assuming he was thinking. From a certain point of view, the smooth transition is a hollowed American tradition, a tribute to the continual continuity of constitutional democracy in spite of our frequent and often bitter partisan disagreements. That tribute depends, however, on the presumption that both parties, in honoring constitutional democracy, are speaking of the same phenomenon, the same constitution, the same democracy. Thomas Jefferson captured the presumption brilliantly in his first inaugural in 1801, coming after a particularly divisive decade of political conflict. But every difference of opinion, this is a quotation, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle, he assured his fellow citizens. We have called by different names, brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. That's not the contemporary Republican Party, by the way. That's an older party that opposed the Federalists. They were really anti-Federalists. The Federalists are the proper, I think, the proper background of the Republican Party, more so than the party of Thomas Jefferson, at least in those disputes, like the Pacificus Helvidius debates and stuff like that. But that's just my correct opinion. The Democratic Party goes back to the 1830s, probably. Andrew Jackson. And the Republican Party, the contemporary Republican Party, goes back to 1854. Abraham Lincoln was the first successful presidential nominee. He's not the first Republican nominee. That was, I think, Fremont from California. Fremont was not successful. Buchanan beat him out. There's a street in Monterey called Fremont, and it's North Fremont is considered kind of the dodgy end of Monterey. It's where the zoning laws permit gun stores and stuff like that. They don't want gun stores in a normal Monterey. So, but Hunter Supply is no longer there, and Big Five no longer sells guns. I think there used to be a Big Five in the Del Monte Mall, and I think they used to sell guns there. Anyway, stop talking about Monterey there. Now, are Americans in 2024 still brethren of the same principle? As Jefferson implies, though not every difference of opinion is a difference in principle, some differences of opinion are. This was the same Joe Biden, after all, who had denounced Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans as representing an extremism that threatens the very foundation of our republic. They are a threat to this country, he said at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, because they do not respect the Constitution, do not believe in the rule of law, and do not recognize the will of the people. Biden told the Democratic National Committee, DNC, that the extreme MAGA philosophy is almost like semi-fascism. Almost like semi-fascism. Okay. In her 2024 acceptance speech, Harris said her opponent wants to be an autocrat and indicted his explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, anyone he sees as the enemy. The key to this autocratic longing, she explained, was to pull our country back into the past. She vowed, and the DNC audience chanted enthusiastically with her, "We are not going back." Wow. We're done with page 9. We're going to page 10. And let me just say, on page 10, not on every page, but on many of the pages, there are ads in the Claremont Review of Books, and the ads are oftentimes of books, and you get a sense of what people are talking about. You can look at the books. You can look at the different titles and artwork and get a sense for what people are talking about, what you might be missing out on. Read the blurbs, so on and so forth. So, for example, here's one from an Ignatius Press, the page after page 10. It's advertising some Catholic books. Peter Kreeft, What Would Socrates Say? An Introduction to Philosophy by the Socratic Method. Looks pretty interesting. It's got a blurb from J. Bujaszewski. Great. Okay. Well, anyway, you can take a look at that. What I'm trying to say is the ads are not annoying. I don't think they're annoying at all, so they don't take away from the quality of the publication. Politics is tough, Trump told Biden in their meeting, and it's in many cases not a very nice world, but it's a nice world today. He was being gracious precisely because it's a tough world. American politicians used to go out of their way to be polite and formally, at least, proper to one another, knowing that on a different occasion they might be expected to denounce one another as fascists, communists, and all sorts of other un-American malefactors. Trump occasionally attacked Biden and Harris on such terms too. But it's unusual to make such denunciations the explicit and overarching theme of a whole presidential campaign. Yet this was Biden's opening and Harris's closing message, and they never strayed far from it. Let me make a comment here, okay? Because when you see a point made like that from somebody like Charles Kesler, you want to pay close attention to it. Because when he says it's unusual to make such denouncements, the explicit and overarching theme of a whole presidential campaign, let me just emphasize this for you. He knows what he's talking about. He's looked at all of them in detail. Okay, he's not just some yahoo with dip in his mouth going, yeah, that's usually, and they say stuff like usually and most, and they're pulling these words out of their rear end. They don't know the full set. So there's no enumerative induction going on here. There's not even statistical correlation here. But with Kesler, when he says stuff like that, he means it. Somebody's asking about this light on my... no, I don't need it. It's morning time. It's 9 o'clock in the morning now. Incidentally, it's 9 July 2025. This is an Olight i5-TEOS. I guess that's what it's called. I've had it for a while. I like it because it takes just a normal AA battery. None of those fancy rechargeables. Just give me a normal one. You can take it on a plane, in other words. Um, the people are not going to take it from you. And it's got a really attractive clip that you can put on your hat. Now, somebody was asking me, why do you have the clip light on your hat? I keep it on there because I like to read outside in California, and you need a light to do that, and it's just convenient to have that. And it's not like I'm in the pitch black. I'm usually reading around sunset, and it's just a little bit too dark for my eyes, and so I like to have the light. I don't walk around in the store with this light on, although I have before, but it's not like a common practice for me. I usually dress up for the store. I take it off and clip my nose hairs, and when I'm buying eggs, I'm socially appropriate. So, anyway, let us continue. To an unusual degree, Kesler continues in America's Red Shift, Claremont Review of Books, Fall 2024, page 10. Each party in 2024 accused the other of being a threat to democracy and the Constitution. They meant something different by that, though. As progressives, whatever differences they may have had, Biden and Harris tended to agree that progress is the natural tendency of events, that there is an inherent direction to history, which is onward and upward toward a state of ever greater freedom, equality, and justice, which state they call democracy. When anything obstructs that progress and threatens to turn back the clock, that tendency is anti-democratic, regardless of how many people voted in favor of it. Are you catching the humor here? You have to kind of know the definition of terms to get the humor. But it's funny what he just said. Progressives expect their reforms to be permanent. How else could they know they are on the right side of history? This is really good stuff. I took an entire course from Kesler on the philosophy of history. We read through Marx, a little bit of Marx, not a lot. Mainly Hegel's philosophy of history, really close reading of it. And some of his philosophy of the right, and I had to dip into some pretty serious secondary sources. I looked at, I think his name is Beiser. Anyways, there's a pretty good Hegel scholar called, I think his name is Beiser. But Kesler, what I'm trying to say is this paragraph right here, there's a lot behind that paragraph. Why? I spent 15 weeks with him on what's behind that paragraph. What's the Hegelian background to the progressive movement in the United States? It's real. It's real. I'm not going to get into all of it today, but I'm just saying this is legitimate stuff here. The Obama Prize. Now we're on the Obama Prize, page 10. Thus, progressives tend to operate in a permanent mood of brinksmanship and hyperbole. They suspect any conservative initiative, no matter how moderate or marginal, from cutting tax rates to reducing illegal immigration, to be a stalking horse for a radical abolition of the modern state. Wow. That's a really insightful observation. With all of its government created rights. For an unmitigated return to the past before progressivism, which they imagine means before progress, not realizing how much progress and actually how much of the most valuable progress took place before their sect was born. So their typical overwrought metaphor, or more exactly, synecdoche for the past is Hitler. Yet in sober moments, even Biden and Harris must recoil slightly at the ridiculousness of this. Several political cartoonists, in fact, imagine the candid moment in their private White House chat when Biden smiled broadly, leaned over, and still sore from how his party had forced him out of the race, whispered to Trump, "You know, I voted for you too." I like to think Biden wanted to confess that, even if he didn't. When Barack Obama made famous the distinction between history's right side and wrong side, he implied that the former not only deserved to win, but that it would win. It would win because it deserved to. Because it deserved to. Otherwise, he might have been accused of mere idealism or wishful thinking. Likewise, the wrong side of history, say human slavery, consists of losers who defend injustices destined to fail or expire. The purported link between what ought to happen and what will happen is essential to this kind of historical assertiveness. Their confidence in the goodness of the future, their secret or visionary knowledge of what is to come, is the root cause of every progressive elite's sense of superiority to those who do not know the future, namely the people, and the politicians who favor the people. When Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt first championed this new progressivism in American politics, they were confident. They were Democrats, by the way, in case you didn't catch that. They were confident it rested on nothing less than the truth. And as discovered by the new sciences of politics and economics, then settling into American colleges and research universities. Hardly any 21st century progressives retain that confidence or continue to believe in progress as an inherent and inevitable historical feature. Even or especially Barack Obama, the most thoughtful of its recent political leaders, who showed how to revive progressivism by regarding history, going to the next page, reading from the hard copy, as an object of human will rather than reason or science. He taught progressives they had to will the future they longed for into existence, not only by the usual political means, but also by manipulating narratives about it, told to themselves and their followers, even as he had manipulated the story of his own life in his postmodern autobiography, Dreams from My Father, 1995. In other words, the distinction between the right and the wrong side of history may not be strictly true, after all, but it is a good story that could inspire many heroic progressive thoughts and deeds. It ought to be true, but only our resolve can make it true. There's a lot behind that too, guys. There's a lot behind that. And I'm going to... it might sound a little bit hypocritical for me to sit here in this rich neighborhood with all this fancy construction going on. It's obviously not Pacific Palisades. Obviously not. It's not a Democrat neighborhood. It's in Orange County. Poor Democrats when their neighborhoods get burned to the ground. Construction's a long time coming for them. Um, no, yeah, actually, that would be in any neighborhood in California because it's a Democrat state. But yeah, I make a plug for. It sounds hypocritical to say this because you're listening to this on an electronic gadget. You're watching this on a screen, maybe. But to read stuff not on screens. Okay, look at this. Read it. Like when I prepare for this podcast, you know where I read this? I read this in Craig's Auto in Whittier, California, when my car was getting something done to it. I walked over to Panera Bread there in the old Whitworth Mall in Whittier, and I brought this sucker with me, and I plopped down and I read the hard copy. I didn't have my phone out. I don't have Facebook on my phone. I don't have Twitter on my phone. I use my phone for podcasts, phone calls, text messages, and sometimes the camera. And that's it, guys. We have to start weaning ourselves off of these mind-destroying devices. And again, maybe you're so addicted to screens that you're watching, poor thing, you're watching this on a screen. It sounds a little bit hypocritical for me to say maybe, but I'm happy to use this media to go against that media because ultimately I don't really believe in it. I think it's actually hurting us. And I'm just trying to do what I can. So get the hard copy is what I'm trying to say. All right. Anyway, let's keep going. But Obama's subtleties, Kesler says on page 12, America's Red Shift, Claremont-Review-of-Books, fall 2024, Charles R. Kesler. But Obama's subtleties are too rarefied for most Democratic politicians. They sensed, however, the crumbling foundations of progressivism and of their own belief in it. So for several decades now, they have propped up those foundations, with a new argument from a different combination of social sciences, especially demography and sociology, telling themselves that what would assure liberal progressivism's victory is not history with a capital H, but the emerging Democratic majority, to use Roy Texera and John Judas's phrase from their 2002 book of that title. Since questioned severely by them in their new and better book, Where Have All the Democrats Gone, 2023. They predicted that new groups within the Democratic coalition, especially professionals, single women, and minority voters, would augment or displace the old New Deal groups and result in a new national Democratic majority. This coalition of the ascendant crashed and burned, however, in the 2024 election. Wow. I'm taking that in again. The woke superciliousness that accompanied and helped to justify its ascendance went down with that ship, too. We can only hope. Should I say something here about Jeffrey Epstein, or should I say something here about Elon Musk? I don't know. I really feel like we're our own worst enemy, man. As far as the political Republicans. There's a lot of small-minded Republicans and they just don't have the perspective it takes to be a majority party. What I mean by small-minded is, if you can't tell the Jeffrey Epstein stuff has national security implications, you are probably extremely dumb. And there's nothing I can do to help you. There's nothing I can do. You're stuck on that, and you're not going to move from it, and you're never going to find out because it's national security. Elon Musk wants to start a new party now because because it was offensive what happened to him. It was offensive. He spent a lot of his personal capital and his company's capital, because he was away from his companies doing the whole Doge stuff. And he really wanted something permanent to come out of that. It was naive. He doesn't understand the permanence doesn't come out of the executive branch. It comes out of the legislative branch. And he wasn't doing the Doge stuff in the legislative branch. The legislative branch is an entirely different animal. Now, I want to say that I don't think he entirely understands that animal, and I don't think a lot of Republicans do. I think that the current push for term limits is a really good example of Republicans not understanding the legislative branch and how it relates to the deep state and corruption. I've been saying this for a long time on this podcast. You got to have an enormous attention span to understand the dynamics at play here. And the typical voter doesn't, and that's why there's a problem. Term limits are going to be a whole other nightmare, and once they're in, that nightmare will become permanent. And it's a worse nightmare. I can't develop that point here, but if you're interested in that point, write this down. I'm going to wait for you to get a pen and paper so you can write it down. Write it down. Understanding Congress podcast published by AEI. This past spring, they talk about term limits. It's called Understanding Congress by AEI. Okay. I'm going to show you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Go to your podcast app. Go to Understanding Congress right here. Clicky little wiki. Scroll down. They have usually once a month. March 3rd, would term limits fix Congress with Casey Burgott. March 3rd, 2025, Understanding Congress. See how slow I have to go? Because people are so like, oh, should I be writing this down? Yes, you should be writing it down, and you should listen to it and pay attention and then listen again. Because it won't fix Congress. It will create a set of problems that you didn't anticipate and you'd have no solution for that are worse. I'm going to keep saying this and saying this and saying this. It makes me so angry. People are so stupid. Voters are stupid. That's why we have the problems we do. Musk did a great job. It's not his fault. He did a great job. But the reason we have the budgetary issues is because voters are stupid. And they're going to continue to be stupid. And as long as the administrative state is permanent, if you have a non-permanent Congress, that's not going to help. It takes a long time to even get your mind wrapped around this thing. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to continue with Kesler. Charles R. Kesler, America's Red Shift. Claremont Review of Books, fall 2024, page 12. Go to ClaremontReview-of-Books.com is where we're at. You're not going to get the cool ads and stuff. They're not a paid sponsor. I'm doing this because I believe in this. I've spent years of my life with these guys, and I believe in what they're doing. I can tell that they're on the right track. Sorry about all these rich people adding to their homes around me in this rich neighborhood. Sorry. Let's continue. Though he didn't use that demographic argument in his speech to the DNC in Chicago, Obama still looked forward to confidently to building a true Democratic majority. Someone ought to endow a prize and name it after Obama, a prize for being painfully out of touch with your own country. He should receive the inaugural trophy. He could display it alongside the Nobel Prize he got in 2009 for bringing peace to the world. Trump and the MAGA Republicans are now in the process of assimilating working class voters, including young blacks and Hispanics, supposedly elements in that true Democratic majority, into a new Trumpian movement that may form, in time, a new Republican majority party. Whether Elon's moves strengthen that majority party and help it be more pure, or splinter it and then let the socialists take over. As smart as he is, I don't know that he is anticipating those moves accurately. And that concerns me. I think he might be overly optimistic about what his calculus is, and he doesn't understand the legislative branch and how it works, and we might all be paying the price for it. That's what I think. I think he should tread lightly. You know, he's got a lot of street cred already. He should just be a loud voice from within the party. This splintering thing it's not going to work. It never does. Never does. And as smart as people are, they just don't understand. They think they're smarter than reality. I guess billions of dollars does that to you. Consider Hispanic voters. Kesler continues. Exit polls showed Trump winning about 55% of the Latino male vote. CNN reported a 42% swing toward Republicans from 2016 to 2024. And it wasn't just among men. Support for the Democrats among Latinas, according to CNN, dropped from a 44% advantage in 2016 to a 22-point advantage this year. The Los Angeles Times interviewed some of Trump's Latino supporters. Why am I for Trump? Asked Tomas Garcia, who supported him in 2016, 2020, and 2024. Because I'm an American, first of all. Wow. The 70-year-old's great-grandparents immigrated from Mexico. Hispanics are about the American dream, said Abraham Enriquez, 29, who was raised by children of Mexican immigrant parents in West Texas. Trump, being a billionaire from New York with a beautiful family and a beautiful wife and as a young Hispanic man, that is the American dream. That is what you one day want to be like. Michael Feinup, an economist who studies Hispanics, commented, Latinos are hardworking, they're self-sufficient, they're entrepreneurial, they're patriotic, they're optimistic. Guess what? Those are fundamentally American characteristics. This campaign has been historic in so many ways, Trump said in his victory speech on election night. We've built the biggest, broadest, and most unified coalition. Let me just say something about that really quick. The week of the election, the Friday after, in 2024, I did a podcast episode called Tender Mercies. You want to take a look at that podcast episode because I predicted there were going to be splinters and we were going to screw it up. I didn't predict we were going to screw up everything. I didn't predict that. I predicted that there were going to be screw ups and that you have to learn to roll with the punches. I didn't predict that Elon was going to be one of those splinters so early on, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm hoping he can be brought back into the fold a bit and work toward purifying our goals here. We got to stay practical but also pure, and that's a very difficult thing to get. Going back to Trump's quote in Kesler, America's Red Shift, Claremont-Review-of-Books, Fall 2024, page 12, on the hard copy. I got the hard copy here. Okay. We've built the biggest, broadest, most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history. They came from all corners: union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. We had everybody, and it was beautiful. It was a historic realignment, uniting citizens of all backgrounds around a common core of common sense. You know, we're the party of common sense. We want to have borders. We want to have security. We want to have things to be good. We want things to be good. Safe. We want great education. We want a strong, powerful military. And ideally, we don't want to have to use it. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together, we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny. That's unquote from Trump and Kesler. Now here's Kesler again. This is Charles R. Kesler, the author. Trump has his own style of hyperbole, of course, but notice how his differs from the Democrats. Conceiving of their own party as being on the right side of history and the Republicans as ensconced firmly on its wrong side, the party of the glorious future versus the party of the discredited, oppressive, immoral past, it makes it very difficult for today's progressives to admire the American character and the American dream. Trump feels no such reservation or doubt. For all his rough edges as a candidate and as a human being, he thinks of Americans as a beautiful people based on a beautiful set of common sense ideas. Perhaps that's why he's on his way to building a new majority party, a truly ascendant coalition, brethren of the same principle. What a beautiful piece by Charles R. Kesler. Charles R. Kesler is the editor of the Claremont Review-of-Books, the Dengler Dykema Distinguished Professor of Government at Claremont McKenna College, where I took 4 classes from him at the Claremont Colleges, and author most recently of Crisis of the Two Constitutions, The Rise and Decline and Recovery of American Greatness and Counter Books, which we featured on this podcast with Charles R. Kesler as a guest. You can see that episode. I will link it to the episode on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts. I've enjoyed this morning with you, having some cup of coffee here, and I've just enjoyed this time with you on the Republican Professor podcast. It's 9 July 2025, years after Jesus. It's a Wednesday. It's 9:30 a.m. here in the Southland in America, and we'll catch you next time.